The chair in front of the HR director felt colder than it should have. Fluorescent lights, the faint smell of printer ink. My hands were folded in my lap so no one could see me shiver. Derek had given up. He thought it was over. He was wrong. But to understand how wrong he was, you have to go back in time. To that conference room before formal complaints and careful, deliberate lies. To the time when Derek Holt was the most trusted person in the entire building. I started at Meridian Software as a junior project manager 6 years ago, when the office still had carpet and no one had heard of a launch sprint. Before I reached mid-level, I learned one thing more than anything else. In a company this fast-paced, your reputation is the only thing that truly belongs to you. Your title can change overnight. Your team could be reorganized by Thursday. But if people know you're meticulous, honest, and someone who never cheats on the books, that reputation follows you everywhere. I built that reputation slowly, line by line, one task at a time. Derek had come to our floor about 3 years ago, transferred from the analytics department downtown. He was sharp-witted, and his sense of humor was dry and self-deprecating, and it felt like you were both in on the same joke. Within the second week of his arrival, we started having lunch together at a Thai restaurant 2 blocks away that had laminated menus and the best green curry in 10 miles. We discussed the morning's chaos, complain about whoever had called this pointless 8 a.m. meeting, and be back at our desks before the hour was up. It was easy. I kept saying this. It was really easy. Over time, we started to take on each other's responsibilities in small ways. If I was pressed for time and forgot to give a department update, Derek would forward me the relevant 3 lines and add a voice note so I wouldn't have to read the entire thread. I did the same for him. When his third quarter forecast was completely blown out of proportion at a review meeting, I stayed an extra hour to help him reorganize the process before anyone had even seen the final draft. The next morning, he brought me coffee without asking. He just left it on my desk and walked away. We had a rapport, an understanding. After 3 years of walking through the same open floor, the same quarterly pressure, and the same changing executives with conflicting priorities, he knew how I worked. And I felt like I knew him. I felt like I knew him. The company had been hinting at layoffs for months before the Orion launch. At first, it was whispers, a hiring freeze here, a team restructuring there. But by October, it had become more than whispers. People were updating their LinkedIn profiles during lunch. The office atmosphere had become alert and competitive, as if everyone were suddenly aware of exactly where they stood and who was standing next to them. Orion was our moment to show our own superiority. A flagship product launch, everyone jumping into action, a launch that either made someone's career or quietly ended it. I was in charge of project coordination, which meant I was responsible for ensuring the accuracy of the data in every status report sent to higher-ups. Everyone's number, I was meticulous, I was thorough. I had documentation for my documents too, and Derek knew that better than anyone. And that's why when he walked into HR that Tuesday morning, he knew exactly where to aim. I didn't find out until my manager, Sandra, called me into the glass-walled conference room we all secretly called the Fishbowl. She closed the door behind her, which she never did. I remember seeing Derek through the glass, walking past without looking in, coffee in hand, as if it were just another ordinary Tuesday. But it wasn't just another ordinary Tuesday. "We've received a formal complaint," Sandra said. She placed a printed email in front of me. This is exactly the kind of cautious, measured language HR uses when they want their words to be undeniable. Data falsification, false status reports, misleading executives. My name, Derek's signature below. I read it twice. Then I looked at Sandra and said, "That's not true." She didn't argue. She didn't agree either. She just folded her arms on the table and told me that I would be placed on administrative leave until the investigation was complete, effective immediately. Someone from the IT department would take me to my desk to collect my personal belongings. That word, escort, like I was a security risk, like I was going to rip something off on the way out. I kept my face normal the whole way back through the office. I knew people were watching. There was no such thing as a private moment on an open floor. I picked up my tote bag, my phone charger, and the little succulent plant that had been on my monitor for 2 years. The guy from IT, a guy named Marcus, who looked very disappointed by the whole thing, was standing 3 feet away, staring at the floor. I didn't cry until I got to the car. What I couldn't quite grasp was the specifics. It wasn't some vague complaint. Derek had submitted the screenshot, the timestamp-altered screenshot of my Orion status report, with all the numbers that didn't match the numbers I had actually submitted. Numbers that, if true, meant I was inflating my percentage of work to make it look like I was finished ahead of schedule. He knew exactly which reports to use. He knew exactly which metrics would look suspicious. He knew the name of the executive sponsor who was most concerned about deadlines, and he copied him. He knew all this because I told him, at lunch, over sandwiches from the deli cart, talking about stress. I trusted him with the details the way you trust someone you've been sitting next to for 3 years. 8 days later was the promotion review. Within 48 hours of my suspension, I heard from a common colleague that Derek had taken over as interim Orion lead. My project, my documentation structure, my relationships with stakeholders, my 2-year-old succulent plant, which is probably still sitting on that desk. He had it all in less than 2 days, perfectly prepared, just in time for the presentation at the review I was now not allowed to attend. That Thursday night I sat in my apartment, my laptop and every backup file I had saved, and I saved everything scattered across the kitchen table. Because that's exactly what Derek thought. He thought the company's insistence on getting everything clean before launch would work in his favor. HR would move quickly, emphasize the external glitz, and have his name on the project before anyone even looked closely. But what he hadn't thought of was me. He knew I was a meticulous person. He had just forgotten that meticulous people don't just keep job descriptions. They kept track of everything. This decline began around 2 in the morning. I closed the laptop and went to the bathroom, and for a long time I stood in front of the sink staring blankly. 3 years. For 3 years he borrowed my charger, I saved the window seat for him, and on winter Tuesdays we shared the last of the roasted red pepper soup from the deli cart. I gave him everything he needed to finish me off, and I did it willingly, at lunchtime, like a fool. I went back into the kitchen and sat on the floor, leaning my back against the cabinet because the chair seemed too ordinary for my feelings at the time. I curled up and sat there. The files were still open on the laptop screen, the timestamps flashing. Then my phone rang. It was a LinkedIn message from a woman named Priya Sandhu. I didn't know him personally, but I recognized the name. He had quietly left the company about 14 months ago after a dispute over a project that no one had ever fully explained. His message was 4 sentences long. I heard what happened. I don't know if this will help, but I want to let you know that you're not the first. He did the same thing to me before I left. Call me if you want to talk. I read the message 4 times, then I called him. It was past midnight, but he picked up on the second ring. Priya was a data analyst on a product integration project that Derek had also worked on. When her calculations didn't match Derek's own forecasts, she was suddenly faced with questions about her own methodology. Questions that Derek had quietly planted in her mind during a private meeting with their VP, she later learned. No formal complaint was filed against him by HR, but the whisper campaign was enough. He sensed the impending danger and resigned before things got any worse. I always assumed it was just office politics, he said. But after hearing you, the timing, the promotion opportunity, the way he presented himself right after that, it's the same strategy, Maya. Exactly the same thing. I wrote down everything he said. After hanging up, I sat at my desk until the sky outside my window turned from black to that special pre-dawn gray. I was no longer restless. Something inside me calmed and settled, the way a room goes silent before someone says something that changes everything. I got to work. I had years of project files on an external drive, timestamped exports from our project management system, version history, and comment threads with my name and date added to each edit. I had the approval chain. I had the original Orion data models, locked and logged, from 6 weeks before Derek had been involved in anything significant with the project. Every file clearly showed who had created what when. I also had emails, not the important ones, the ones I had already removed. I was talking about the minor ones. The ones where Derek asked me to explain a method because, as he wrote, "You always make these things understandable." The ones where he forwarded my frameworks to his own folder, which silently, thoroughly demonstrated that he fully understood whose work he was now claiming to question. I organized everything into a folder, labeled it with the date. Then I drafted a short message to Priya asking if she would be willing to speak directly to HR, not to fight for me, just to tell her own experience in her own words on the record. She replied in less than 3 minutes. The decision had already been made. Priya didn't answer alone. I sent a short note to 2 other colleagues who were present at Orion's key milestones, people who would receive my status updates in real time and who had written proof of their own, whether they thought so or not. They both got back to me within the hour, no dramatic announcements. Just, "Yes, I'll talk to them. Tell me where to go." The next morning, I submitted my documentation package to HR, 37 files. A 1-page written summary, single-spaced with timestamps inline. I didn't add any of my own opinions. I didn't ask them to punish Derek. I just pointed out what the record showed and let the record speak for itself. The waiting was the worst part. For 4 days I sat in that open office, watching Derek go about his morning routine as if nothing were moving beneath his feet. He brought a cup of coffee from the nice place across the street. He was smiling at something on his screen. Once he caught my eye from across the room and nodded slightly, as if we were still the kind of people who nod at each other. I looked back at my monitor. On the 5th day, HR called me back. The atmosphere in that conference room was different. There was a legal pad in front of Linda in HR, and one of the executive team was sitting there, a guy named Greg, whom I had met maybe twice, who ran operations. He introduced himself as if I didn't already know him. "We've reviewed the paperwork you submitted," Linda said, "and we've taken statements from several witnesses. We want to let you know that the charges against you have been found to be unfounded. We also have concerns about the nature and purpose of the original charges." I spread my hands flat on the table. "Maya, we're sorry this happened. We don't say things like this lightly." The following Tuesday, Derek resigned. I heard the news indirectly from someone else, a brief discussion with everyone about the team changes, nothing more. While I was in the meeting, he cleaned his desk sometime that afternoon. By the time I got back to my seat, his monitor had gone dark and his chair had been pushed back. 3 weeks later, I was called into my manager's office. He told me that the company was restructuring the project management department and they wanted me to lead it. New title, new scope of work. He said that they had been thinking about this all along, which may or may not have been true, but I nodded that I was interested, and we changed the subject. At the next all-hands meeting, our VP specifically mentioned the Orion project. He thanked the team members who had kept the documentation standards high under pressure. He looked at me as he said it. I didn't stand up or raise my hand. I just sat there and digested it. I still sometimes eat lunch in the same spot by the window. The table is big enough for 2. Now I usually have my laptop open. It took me a while to let people get close again, really close. The kind of closeness where you talk straight away, where you share concerns before you've thought about something carefully. I'm more alert now. I notice who's listening and who's just putting things together. I notice when someone is asking follow-up questions out of curiosity or to build a picture. This isn't pessimism. At least I don't think so. It's just knowing what I didn't know before.